Welcome to the second part of our first session in Intro to Mobile Programming. In this section, we're going to take a look at the history of mobile devices, and we're also going to take a look at some mobile development considerations. I'll have a couple of personal stories from both of these. One second, please. I have a couple of stories from both of these I'll share with you as well. So we hear these words a lot about 3G and 4G and Edge Network and GSM, and what does it all mean? Ask yourself, when was the first mobile phone used? It's kind of an interesting thought. In a lot of you are probably younger than me and probably have always had the idea of a mobile phone or concept of a mobile phone. Um, I remember before they were popular at all, there were things that we had where you always had a phone plugged in, and if there was a thunderstorm, you would usually get off the phone because there was a fear that lightning would strike the telephone line and come through and harm you somehow. So you couldn't talk on the phone during a thunderstorm. Naturally, if your car broke down, you had a legitimate problem. There was usually no way to get a hold of somebody, and so in the late 70s, things like citizens band radios became popular because at least then you could signal for help. Nowadays, it's kind of funny. If I forget my phone at home, I feel lost without it. But I know, and I can remember my car breaking down when I was in college, and it was probably about a mile from my dad's house, and so I just left my car where it was. I was in a suit. I'd just come home from work, and walked in a terrible storm all the way home, and then scared my dad when he saw a stranger at his house and didn't know it was me. So, that's the way things used to be. We had things like phone books and payphones. I know in one of my Android development classes, somebody made a mobile app that would help you find a payphone, which goes to show how far mobile phones have gone. We no longer think of them as phones as much as small computers. So, in any case, zero G, of course, they didn't call it zero G at the time, but there were some early attempts at mobile phones all the way as far back as 1947. And then that was not very common. That was basically using a radio frequency to make a phone call. Not very common. Then we had 1G, which is when people really when what was called cell phones became more mainstream. So they were expensive. This is going into the 80s and the 90s, and most people didn't have one, but you knew what one was. You knew it was possible. Then we had 2G, which was really the first digital cellular network. Digital allows us to fit more people in more phone calls into the same wireless spectrum. Allows a lot better compression. Then we have broadband, and then we have native IP, which is 3G and 4G respectively. So let's take a look at some of these. So 0G, the very first attempts. In this case, if you made a phone call, you consumed an entire radio channel, an entire frequency. And because there weren't many cells, as we would call them, you would have one entire area that would have three channels. So out of the thousands of people, about 3,000 who were signed up to use this mobile telephone service, only 3 people could have phone calls simultaneously. So not a whole lot of compression, very basic. Okay, 1965, more frequencies were available, but you still, because you didn't have a lot of scalability, because each phone call took up so much airspace, there was still capacity control. Okay, 1960s, there was Radio Common Carrier, which was a competitor to the mobile telephone service. And so nothing that was really nationwide or anything of that deal. Really, the first mobile cellular phone was in 1973. The first one that was really used beyond any kind of small scale was a Motorola phone in 1973. So then we had the analog cellular. I can remember this very well. I remember this very well when the concept of a cellular phone came out. Analog, so that means it's using wavelengths, it's not breaking them down into bits and bytes. Using wavelengths, using an analog signal, does not offer much compression. So you couldn't fit many calls into you couldn't fit many calls into the bandwidth that was available at the time. But then on the other hand, not many people had cell phones at the time. They were expensive. They were, depending on where you got them. When I was in college, I worked for Elder Beerman, which is a department store, and this is going back to 93, 94, sometime around then. Okay, think about 93, 94. Where would you buy electronics back then? Honestly, Best Buy was kind of a new concept across the country. Circuit City was also fairly new. Usually, you'd buy electronics oftentimes at a department store. You definitely wouldn't buy them at Walmart or Kmart. That concept was very foreign. Walmart, Kmart were really just kind of cheap, inexpensive goods, maybe some clothing, toiletries, that kind of things. The concept of buying, I remember when my dad bought his first television at Kmart, he was baffled that you could buy TVs at Kmart. But in any case, I worked at a department store, so kind of like a Macy's, kind of like that, and my job was selling computers and telephones, not cellular telephones, but phones you would plug into the wall. And also, I sold pagers, which was kind of a new concept at the time. And the idea is it was a little device about the size of many cell phones are today. And you would hear a tone or a vibration, and then a seven-digit number would appear, and then you'd call back that number from a landline phone. That's the way that pagers usually worked, and they were pretty popular in the early mid 90s, late 90s even. Especially, frankly, it was kind of a status thing among high school kids to have a pager with your phone number. And so, the pager was about $70, and I think the monthly service on that was usually $10 to $25 or so. So anyway, went from there. I left Elder Beerman in a major career move when I was 19 years old and went to work at Radio Shack. That was in my dark days. And that was the first time I had experience selling a cellular phone. And that was when they started coming out with this idea that you could get a lot more phones in people's hands if you lowered the price of the phone but increased the monthly service fee. Okay, so you paid for the phone by having, at the time, it was often you'd have a 3 year long contract. So you'd pay for the phone with the 3 year contract essentially. And that brought the prices of phones down significantly from $3,000 or so dollars to $600 to $300, and then finally to free. These weren't fully featured phones like we have today, but they were phones. So I recall selling those was kind of the holy grail as a Radio Shack employee because the customer paid $0 but signed a 3 year contract. Meanwhile, as a salesman, it counted as a $300 sale, and you get commissioned on a $300 sale. So that was pretty popular. What was interesting is that Radio Shack also sold police scanners. I don't know that there's much use for a police scanner anymore, but again, keep in mind in the 80s and the 90s, things were different, and a lot of communication happened over the air in an unencrypted format. Because again, remember, we're talking about an analog signal. We're not breaking it down into zeros and ones. It's literally your voice is an analog signal. So Radio Shack sold police scanners where people could listen in to police calls, basically officers talking to each other. And believe it or not, that was a fairly good way to entertain yourself in the 80s and 90s, and even prior to that. My father always had a police scanner, and some nights he'd just sit in his bedroom and listen to the police scanner. Now, what's funny is that these police scanners also, I mean, they were basically scanners. They were called police scanners or emergency scanners, and they were handheld, but they would pick up any frequency, really. And so you could use a police scanner to listen in to cellular phone calls and cordless phone calls. Both of them operated in a similar principle. So this happened with some kind of frequency. As a matter of fact, it is funny. In the news story today is about the National Security Agency looking at phone records. I remember very well in 1997 when one of John Boehner's cellular conversations was overheard, and I believe even recorded, which, by the way, is illegal. Um, and that made big news, which John Boehner at the time wasn't the Speaker of the House as he is today. But that made big news back at the time that people were snooping on cell phones. As I understand, the rule is that you could not record it unless at least one party knew that it was being recorded. But in any case, working at Radio Shack, this is something customers would occasionally come in. They would buy a frequency scanner, called a police scanner, but really it just scanned any frequency. So anything that was in the public airwaves you could listen to. So many times people would come in and you'd have to program it to listen to a certain frequency, and those frequencies were kind of well known. So not very secure. Also, there was a limit to the amount of conversations you could fit, much more than the old 0G, but still a limit. Another thing I remembered from that era is we're spoiled now. There are things. Okay, so this is going back to about '95 when I sold cell phones at Radio Shack. Nowadays, we naturally assume that we're going to have good mobile phone coverage no matter where we are. And we also assume that it's not going to cost us more than our monthly minutes. Back in the 90s, usually, you get the phone, it'd either be $300 or maybe it'd be free. Monthly service, and this is what there was no such thing as data. This was purely mobile phone. Monthly service was usually about $40 a month, but you had to pay 25 cents per minute that you spoke on the phone. And if you were roaming, it would be an additional surcharge. So if you were out of town, that would be an additional surcharge. Plus, long distance would be an additional surcharge. So talking on a mobile phone back then was a very expensive thing. If somebody called you, you tried to keep the conversation short, and if a telemarketer called you, you'd get very upset typically. Because that's, you were paying a lot for that. The other thing I remember is that when someone would buy a phone, you'd have to pull out a map, a coverage map. You look at a coverage map now, and most of the U.S. is covered, except for some outlying areas in the West. Back then, the coverage maps were purely the inner city and the interstates. If you looked at a coverage map of Ohio, you'd see fairly good coverage within 275, fairly good coverage within downtown Columbus, downtown Dayton, downtown Cleveland, and then only the interstates would be covered outside of that. So it took a while for these networks to start growing, but needless to say, they did. So phones became more popular, and around 1997 in Cincinnati, we were actually one of the first digital networks. And despite selling cellular phones for a long time myself, the first time I actually got a cellular phone, or a digital phone as it were, is when my dad bought me one as a graduation present when I graduated from Miami in 1997. Incidentally, it was one of the first digital phones in Cincinnati, and Cincinnati was one of the first test markets for digital airwaves. So it was a real rarity at that time. Let me see if I can pull up a picture of, let's see. It has here that digital went back to, 91 is a creation in Europe. But in the U.S., it didn't really, we knew it was going to happen. It didn't really take off until about 97. So what's interesting is that the IBM Simon is pretty much what we would consider a smartphone, one of the first smartphones, because it had things like a calculator, a calendar, apps like that. You could write apps for it. It was very short-lived, though, and it was very large. Here, let's see. I'm pulling up over here a picture. I have it on my other monitor. Let me just bring this across for a second. Okay, 1 second, please. Uh-oh, my computer's running slowly all of a sudden. Okay, I'm bringing across. Okay, sorry, one moment. Okay, and boom. And resize. And this is the Sony CMDX2000. That was my first mobile phone. Actually, it was this one right here. No, it was the 1000. It was this one because that little lid would flip up. And again, not the smartphone by today's standards, but being a digital phone, that was a real first. That was really impressive. I'll tell you something else that's interesting. I had that phone I think I finally retired it when they no longer supported that phone. I had that phone for about 5 or 6 years. It lasted quite a long time. Um, a very reliable phone. So anyway, that was the first digital. Now, even the digital means we're taking our voice, we're converting it to zeros and ones, and we're running it across the network. It didn't take too long for data to surpass voice. Is what we used phones for. So 3G mobile broadband came out, which made a better effort to capture data instead of voice. Think about your phone now. How much time do you actually talk on it versus how much time do you actually use it for apps or something like that? If you think about the amount of information that your phone has to process, the vast majority of that information is more than likely data. So 3G mobile broadband was a way to handle this extra data that outnumbers the voice. And more recently, we have 4G. Okay, 4G 10 times faster than 3G, and instead of a circuit switching network as we had with previous analog phones, this is an all IP network, which means it works more like our computers work. Okay, so it's treating everything as data. Even phone calls, it's treating just as streaming audio. So the backbone of the network in a 4G network is an IP network. It's a data network. It's not a voice network. Voice is converted to data before it's sent across that network. Okay, so 4G is currently the latest and greatest that we have. Okay, mobile phones themselves, I showed you a few examples of some older mobile phones. The 1973 was the first Motorola phone, what we call a brick phone because it was fairly large. 83, the Dynatac was a more common phone that came out. This is when it was basically not a lot of people had a mobile phone except maybe your rich uncle. I also remember the battery life. The battery life on the phones. Well, I'll say the phones were not yet optimized to use make efficient use of energy for a couple reasons. First of all, there wasn't really this concept of portability. Everything was always plugged in. Secondly, sometimes antennas were very far apart back then, so it had to take an enormous amount of energy to find an antenna that it could talk to and communicate with. So the phones that were in the 1G or the 2G in those cellular networks tended to be quite large just because of the battery. As a matter of fact, they were called, oftentimes in the late 80s and early 90s, they were called car phones because while they were mobile phones, they were affixed to the car. My dad's first mobile phone, he got in 1992, and he got it, I think, from Ameritech down on Princeton Road. And he actually had to schedule an appointment, and they installed the phone in his car like you would install maybe a custom set of rims or something like that today, or window tinting. He actually had to take his car into a service bay, and they literally installed the phone into his car, and then the phone's antenna was mounted on the car's roof. So that's one of the reasons for that is that it could pull a lot of energy from the car's electrical system and didn't need a separate battery. So that's really what a lot of cellular phones were back in the day. When they went to handheld, even, if you were lucky, you would get a phone that would have an attached battery, but that would have very limited talk time 30 minutes of talk time, and then the battery was dead. If you wanted more talk time, what you had to do is carry around a briefcase phone where you actually had the phone and a separate briefcase that had the battery. And I mean, it was a sizable briefcase, a little smaller than a backpack that you might have today, but it was something with a handle or a shoulder strap, and that was essentially the battery. And again, I can remember selling several of those at Radio Shack when I worked there. So, in 1989, Nokia came out with a handheld, and then in 1997, we really saw a move to a phone like the one pictured on the right of this slide, the Nokia 6110. That was a huge innovation. The idea that you could have a phone that small that would fit into your hand. So Nokia came out with that. Sony came out with the CMDX, the picture of the phone I showed you earlier. And then Motorola came out with what was called the StarTAC flip phone. So kind of like a clamshell phone. That was considered a real innovation. Little side note on that, Radio Shack did not sell that phone. They didn't have the license to sell that phone. Radio Shack tended to sell its own brand of things. But that phone was enormously popular, the flip phone. When people would come in and ask for a flip phone, usually my fellow salesman would give them some story about how we don't sell them because the flip mechanism wears out too quickly, which probably not much truth to that, but it's good thing for a salesman to say when he can't sell it. So, in any case, this was really a big move when phones got more energy efficient and could fit into your hand like this. The next big move was this idea of a smartphone. At this period, you could have something called a Palm Pilot, which was a personal digital assistant, a PDA, something like that. And it could do things like it'd have your calendar and schedule and things like that, but it was not integrated with the phone. There were two separate devices. And the Palm Pilots were kind of limited. So I can remember, again, very well in the late 90s, a lot of people would have a Palm Pilot and a phone separately. They might have the Nokia, and then they'd have a Palm Pilot as well. And I resisted the Palm Pilot thing. I never really got into that. I thought I'll wait until they come out with a phone that's a Palm Pilot as well, which they eventually did. 1999, BlackBerry came out with a phone that had a traditional QWERTY keyboard. You use your thumbs for it. I mean, it wasn't a large keyboard. BlackBerry really became very popular with that, and today a lot of people. One thing that annoys me slightly is when I pull out my Android phone or a spare battery for my Android phone, and everybody assumes I have an iPhone, which I don't. Um, Back then in the 90s and in the early part of the 2000s, BlackBerry was kind of the generic word for smartphone, which is funny when you look at our survey from class and nobody in class has a BlackBerry. It wasn't long ago, and I mean as recently as 5 years ago, when BlackBerry was just the generic word for smartphone. So they were very dominant. Nokia came out in 2006 with something that honestly looks a lot like an iPhone does today. It just didn't gain market acceptance like the iPhone did. And the iPhone came out, woefully popular. Not long after that, Android came out. And as I mentioned, when I designed the programming courses, I had originally designed it as BlackBerry programming, and then that concept just burned and died. And then iPhone and Android both became pretty popular. So smartphones, that's what brings us where we are today. One of the things, just as a kind of a guess, if you take a look at when the iPhone came out, it was right about the time of the Great Recession, right about the time the Great Recession started in 2008. That's when the banks were failing. A lot of people were losing their jobs. And when it came out, somebody made a game and made a lot of money. And word spread pretty quickly that somebody made a game, released it on the App Store, and it made a lot of money. Meanwhile, there were frankly a lot of unemployed people who were trying to reskill themselves. And at that time, this push to make mobile apps really caught on very quickly. And in my job, I was interviewing people, I was hiring people. And we noticed that a lot of people were applying for programming jobs and they didn't have much programming experience, except they did have mobile phone programming experience. And my boss asked me, he says, why do you think so many people are coming with only mobile phone development experience? And my answer is it was probably kind of if you did lose your job and wanted to train up on something, and you heard that someone made $800,000 by making an app, that's probably something you'd think about looking into. So it became very popular. Timing happened to be fairly good then. So that's a bit of the history of mobile phones and mobile phone networks. Let's switch gears for a second, and we're going to take a look at just some high-level considerations about designing your first mobile app. What are some best practices? And again, I will use as an example some of the things I've done with plant places with the mobile app that I have. I'm trying to bring that up. and an emulator on my other screen. Unfortunately, it's not coming up now, so I might just show that off a little bit more uh, later on, in a future lecture. But the Plant Places mobile, we can GPS plants and submit them to the Plant Places website. We can take a picture of anything, a plant or a house or anything, a shirt, and we can find plants that have the colors in that house or shirt or whatever it is that we took a picture of. We can also view a map of plants. So as I say, I'm trying to bring it up in another screen, but so far it's not coming up. It's on my phone, but well, I guess I could get my phone and show you I guess I could do that. Hang on one second. And the phone was in my pocket the entire time. Okay, I need to trigger the webcam though. One second. Okay, well, I see the webcam over here on my left, but I don't know if it's actually recording that or not, so I'll make this one quick. Here's my phone, and what I'm going to do is so I'll have the emulator up so that we'll have a better look at this later. I also want to block that light because that probably looks kind of annoying. I go on and I'm going to hit the first button, which is search by color. A little bit hard to see there. Okay, I'm going to choose take new photo, camera, just once. Okay. And what you're looking at is, this is kind of weird. You're looking at my phone trying to take a picture of me, which is also what happens to be in the viewfinder. Let's try to block that light. This is tricky. Okay, there we go. So you see this is my phone taking a picture of me and you're looking at it through my webcam, so a little bit of indirection. I'm going to pick up this envelope. Let me see if I can find something more colorful sitting around. Okay, something red. I'll pick up something red. That's a little kind of what you put a hot pan on. And take a picture of it. Again, line that up. Try and block the light there that's above my head. I need to just take that light out. Okay, we'll take this guy. So if you see, I now have my phone over this red mat, and I'm going to take a picture of it. I'll do it off to the side so I can focus it a bit. Okay, took the picture. What it did, and this is what I'm trying to show, and again, this will be a bit easier when I can show you in an emulator. I'll try to get that working next week. It took a picture of that red mat, and it found the top 12 colors in that mat. So what I can do now as a user is I can choose one of those colors, and what it does is it gives me a list of plants that contain that color, and now it's going out to the Plant Places website, and it's going to show me pictures of that plant. So while I'm talking through this slide deck, I'm going to be talking about, and again, I know that's you can't really see the plants there, but I'll try and get the emulator up by next week so that we can actually see that live. But there it is, working and living on the phone. So at this point, I'm going to try and go back and go to the slide deck, which will take me just one moment. Okay, and hopefully I haven't tried that mix of webcam plus lecture like this, so hopefully that'll work okay. Okay, designing your first mobile app. Limitations and benefits. First of all, should it be an app? Should it be a web page? A lot of times when your aunt or uncle is going to find out that you're in a mobile development class, and they're going to tell you that they have a great idea for an app. And by the way, I found there's a correlation. Every person who has a smartphone or knows what a smartphone is has $1 million idea for an app. And so you kind of have to be picky and choosy because everybody's going to come with you with these wonderful ideas for an app. And you have to be a little bit picky and choosy and, say, I don't know if that'd really make money. So be warned. Sometimes when you ask people, so what's your idea for an app? What they'll tell you is, well, I want to show a list of cars and from the 60s, let's say. I want to show a list of cars from the 60s. Okay, what do you want to have? Oh, pictures and details, and stuff about the car. You have to ask yourself at this point, is this really a mobile app or is it a web page? Don't jump too quickly to make something an app. If you can make a web page out of it, especially a friendly web page, a web page that's friendly for mobile. I can show you an example of something that could be a web page or something that could be an app. I'm going to go to plantplaces.com, the live website. Okay, 1 second. Okay, oops. Okay, I'll search for, I'm going to go here and I'm going to search for a plant. We'll say red bud. Okay. Now, here's the deal. If we look at this, you see it's in kind of a, if I compress this web page down, it's kind of hard to read because there's a lot of navigation here. Okay, I'm going to click on Eastern Redbud, one of my favorite trees. Okay, it's taking just a second. Okay, now see again, there's navigation on the top, there's navigation on the side. If we were to take this and try to squeeze it into a mobile device, it would look really bad because we'd be using a lot of our very valuable real estate just for navigation. Now, take a look at this. I'm going to put ampersand. Whoops, sorry. Go over. Source equals mobile. Okay, and what's going to happen now? It takes off that navigation. It's the exact same page, but without the navigation. Now it's much easier to read on a mobile device. Maybe not perfect, and nothing will ever be perfect, but it's much easier to read on a mobile device. We're looking at the exact same page we were looking at before. The only difference is we've given it a different style sheet. Okay, we've given it a different style sheet. And the style sheet that we've given it takes away the navigation. That's all. Exact same page, just a different style sheet that says silence the top and the left nav, make it more mobile friendly. So when someone comes to you with $1 million idea, ask yourself, should it be an app, should it be a web page? If it should be a web page, just make it a web page because number one, you're going to apply to a much wider audience that way. Partially because you don't have to make a custom version for iPhone, Android, Windows Phone, BlackBerry, anything else that might be out there. Okay. Should it be an app? If it uses something that is specific to the mobile phone, like the GPS, the camera, the accelerometer, anything that's specific to a mobile phone that you would not find on a normal computer, okay, then maybe it should be an app. Okay. Next, you have to ask, okay, what platform do I want to design for? What version? How am I going to distribute this? So, what platform? Is it going to be iPhone? Is it going to be Android? Is it going to be Windows? Okay, what version? If it's Android, are we shooting for version 2 or version 4? Distribution. How are we going to get it out to our users? What you can do when you write a mobile app many times is you can make you can basically make a package out of it and you can distribute that. One option is to distribute it through the Google Play Store if it's an Android app, or the Apple's application marketplace as well. And I'll show you, here we go. This is the Plant Places storefront on the Google Play Store. Okay, so lots of benefits. Lots of benefits here. It's a standard format. People are going to use it. People are going to be able to review it. This will also manage updates and the like. On the other hand, I could also take this packaged file and I could just email it. If what we get when we write an Android app, we get something called an APK file. It's kind of like a zipped up file, but it contains an Android program. So I could just when I deploy it on the apps on the Play Store, I'll just upload it. But if I wanted you to install it, I could just make the APK and I could email it to you. If you open that email on your phone and click on the link, then it will automatically install on your phone. Okay. So distribution, how are we going to distribute it? We also want to consider, and I'll add one more here. This is a big consideration: maintenance. Okay, maintenance. A big difference between app versus web page. A web page, if something goes wrong, you fix it and all users see it immediately. Okay, you fix it, something goes wrong, all users see it immediately. With an app, you can fix it, send out an update, and you can hope that users are going to update it, but you have no control over it. You've lost control. This is the developer console for Google Play. This is what happens behind the scenes when you deploy an app. So again, this is Plant Places Mobile, and what we'll see is that 145 people have installed this at one point. That's an important number. 145 people have installed it. It's free, okay, completely free. Now, of those 145 people, eventually you trade in your phone, you get another phone. Okay. If you don't install it on your next phone, then it's no longer considered an active install. So over here on the left, we have 109 active installs. That means people who physically have a phone, a live phone right now, with Plant Places Mobile running on it. Okay. I can click on this, and what we'll see, it'll take a moment to load. It gives me some very interesting information. Okay, let's take a look at statistics. Okay, and again, this is my view as a developer. This shows me information that's not available to the public. Let's scroll down, and this is what I really, really like. Take a look at the different Android versions where Plant Places Mobile is installed. Majority of people are on something that begins with a 4. We have about 50% of the people here, about 12% of the people here. The trick is a lot of people are still on version 2. And while that is the case, I'm limited on what new features I can put in the app. Here's the other interesting thing. If I go to app version, we'll see that 97 people are on version 5, 12 people are on version 2. Version 2 I released in February. I found a couple small bugs, a couple things I wanted to improve, and some new features. So I released version 5 February 26th. So version 2 was only alive for about 23 days. About 23 days, that's it. Now, at one point there were a lot more people on version 2. Several of them have upgraded, but 12 of them have not, and there's nothing I can do about that. I cannot force somebody to upgrade. So that's something you need to consider very carefully. Quality is very important. So if I found a bug in a website, I'd fix the website and we're good. With an app, if I release it with a bug, or even worse, a security vulnerability, there could be people out there who never take the upgrade, and that's something we need to be very careful about. Okay, so distribution of benefits. Okay, limitations of mobile phone. Another thing, a lot of times your uncle, your aunt, your mom, your dad comes to you with a great idea for a mobile app, and again, these are things that have happened to me. One person came to me with an idea for a massive quantitative stock screener app. And that's just not what mobile phones are meant for, because they're not meant for doing heavy math processing. That's not what they're meant for. They have a limited battery life. And you think about your laptop, it's usually plugged into the wall, but your phone, you can be away from a charger for 16 hours, and it has a very small battery. That battery life is a bottleneck that affects everything else down the line. How fast is the processor? How much memory does it have? These are all things that are limitations. So battery life, processor, memory. Because we just can't have a high-powered device. You notice that your laptop or your desktop might put off a lot of heat. That means it's consuming a lot of energy. Your phone shouldn't produce a lot of heat, and if it does, something's running down the battery very quickly. So we want to be careful. We can't have the souped-up processors that we would have in a gaming machine. We don't want to have crazy gaming things going on that are going to suck down our memory either, or our battery. Next thing is distributed users, the one I just talked about. I can't control people who are on an older version of the software. I can't force them to upgrade. And it drives me nuts because I know of things that I've done more efficiently, but I can't force people to upgrade. Multiple device synchronization. This is a bigger issue right now. This is something we're seeing a lot more of right now that we didn't see as much several years ago. I'm frugal. I'm pretty cheap. I don't spend money unless I have to. So I have my Android device, and that's fine with me. Other people, though, will have that, and then maybe an iPad, or maybe an Android tablet, or a Kindle, or something like that. And they expect if they have apps installed on that, on all their tablets, all their phones, their laptop, their work laptop, they expect things to always be in sync. And this is part of the cliche that we hear a lot about the cloud. The cloud is the idea that you don't have things stored on one computer that you cannot access somewhere else. Okay, so we have to consider how much data do we really want to store on the mobile device, and how much data do we want to store in a central location. That's something we'll explore this semester. Where do we put the data? Where do we hold the data? Okay. Another trick is no full-size keyboard. So we want to do a lot of auto completing. We want to make it easy for the user to use our application with limited keystrokes. We want to absolutely minimize keystrokes. Okay. Are there ways that we can share single sign-on? Are there auto-completes? Is there predictive text? Can we keep navigation minimum? Again, we don't want to throw out a crazy, fully featured app with all kinds of pages. Simpler is better. Keep it simple. If you need to, redirect them to a web presence later. Okay. And also remember that a lot of times when people are using their mobile device, they're multitasking. And again, I'll let you fill in the blank in what that means, but I'm sure if you think of when you're using your mobile device, many times you're doing something else as well. Okay, limited monitor real estate. That's the example I just showed you with Plant Places, where when it's on a full-size browser, it's going to have left nav and top nav. When it's on a mobile device, though, through Plant Places Mobile, that navigation will go away. Okay. Okay, the last bullet point is good for profit for the mobile phone uh, manufacturers, the operating system owners, not good for programmers. Different vendors, different programming languages. This is taking us back to the early 80s, where every computer had a separate programming language, and we go through this over and over again. It seems to repeat itself every 10 to 15 years. The market share leader makes a very proprietary ecosystem where you have to write for that market share leader, and then what you write for that person is not portable to the other platforms. And then the other platforms come together and congeal on this idea of open standards. We see it now. We've seen it in the last 5 years with iPhone versus Android versus everybody else. We saw it. We saw it in the 90s with Windows versus everybody else, where you could use Visual Basic to write a Windows app, wouldn't run anywhere else. Or the Microsoft Visual C++ one great on Windows, not so great anywhere else. Rewind back 15 years before that, and the way that zeros and ones in a computer become letters of the alphabet is something we call character encoding. There was a standard character encoding called ASCII, ASCII, the American Standard Coding for Information Interchange, ASCII. Everybody used that except the market leader, who was IBM at the time on mainframes. They had something called EBCDIC, Extended Binary Coded Decimal Interchange Code. What they did is they took ASCII and they just switched the uppercase and lowercase letters, basically. But as a result, if you wrote something for IBM, you couldn't port it to a different platform. This happens all the time. And then eventually someone comes out with an open standard, and frankly, the open standard usually wins. The big story about this, if you're my age, is VHS and Betamax. In the 80s, in the early 80s, there were two competing technologies, VHS and Betamax. And Beta was a superior technology, higher quality, but the difference is VHS was licensed. The owner of VHS, which I want to say was JVC, I don't remember for sure, they licensed their technology to the competition. And eventually VHS won that battle. So this is something we see over and over again. Mobile development is no different. Mobile development is no different. Okay. So, what are the benefits? When do we want to have a mobile app as opposed to a web page? Well, the benefits are, one of the biggest is location aware. Okay, location aware. The phone knows where we are, and if I can, again, I'll say Plant Places so much this semester you might get tired of it, but bear with me a second. It's coming up over here. So one of the things that we do on Plant Places is we GPS trees and plants, and the idea is that if you go to many garden centers or big box stores or wherever you prefer to buy your plants, you see the same 5 trees over and over again. The idea with GPSing plants is that you can look up a tree like the Cercis canadensis that I was talking about earlier, the redbud, and you can find out, oh wow, this tree's planted all over the place around me, and you can see living examples of what it will be when it's an adult. So there are a lot of trees that, let's see, like Asimina triloba. Well, I'll go to Plant GPS. There are a lot of trees that you might not know about. But then if you look them up and you see that they grow around you, all of a sudden it becomes a good motivation to find that tree. Here's an example. Here's the Cincinnati Zoo. And take a look. Each of these points is a plant that we have mapped at the Cincinnati Zoo. You see we have that pretty well covered. Okay, 277 plants mapped at the zoo. I don't recognize any of those actually. Amelanchier, this is a really nice one. Here's one that's hard to find, but a wonderful tree. Amelanchier, beautiful fall color. There it is at Spring Grove. And you see here it is mapped. Now, how did we find those bullet points? We took the Plant Places mobile and we're able to GPS a plant. So wherever you see one of these bullet points, either I or somebody else was standing there with the app and tagged it. Okay. We have, oh gosh, I want to say on the order of about 1,000 plants now GPSed by using this. So that's something where the mobile app augments the website. Okay. The website shows the GPS locations. It's augmented with the mobile app. So we don't have all the maintenance nightmares of a mobile app to get benefit out of it, because people who use the website get the benefit of seeing the GPS locations of plants. You can have the mobile app and see a map of plants around you. That's something I need to make some improvements to. You can do that, but still the website is enhanced just because we're getting data from the mobile app. Accelerometer, that's another thing that's something you'll only get on a mobile device. That means how fast are you moving, how fast are you tilting the device. Camera, boy, that was a big one. In Plant Places, I really wanted to do search by color, but somehow wanted to do it in a user-friendly way. If you go to Plant Places now and you see this drop-down, you'll see that you can pick a color. But honestly, humans have a difficult time remembering colors. So, what's the color of my house or my siding? Gosh, it could be any of these, So I really wanted to have an input method where you could take a picture live and get that color. And I fought that one for a while, how to do that. I thought about that for a long time. Finally, when smartphones came out, that became a very easy way to do it. You could use the camera on board the smartphone and capture a color that way. Okay. Another thing is, phone is always with the user. So I know they did a study of where people come from when they're visiting a website, and a lot of times there was a TV show, and it spawned a whole bunch of web searches. I forget the exact scenario, what the TV show was or what the searches were, but there was some TV show spawned a lot of web searches. What it was is people were sitting on their couch and they didn't want to get up and go to the laptop, so they just used their mobile phone to look something up. So one big benefit of the mobile phone is that it's usually with the person. It's almost always with the person. You can probably think of a few other benefits as well, but these are several of the benefits. Okay. Some other considerations. Okay. Online, offline. Is it safe to assume your user is always online? Probably not. Probably not. So how do we seamlessly handle online versus offline? I got, between vacation and my full-time job, I travel a lot. I'm a bit fortunate that my full-time job tends to send me around the world, which is great because I get to get a lot of plant GPS locations that way. When I would go to England, I could get the GPS locations and I would have to type in what the plant is. Okay, I get the GPS locations, I'd have to type in what the plant is. The problem with that, let me pull up Plant Places again if I may, one moment. Here's the problem. I have to do a manual match. So let me go to articles here. I'm going to sign in. Be just a second. Okay. Oh, sorry. I think I forget what username I have. Oh, okay. Here's the problem with that. I would type in the plant name and get the GPS. The problem is I would have to go here and manually match up every plant. So here we go, Chamaecyparis glauca. I click on this. What I have to do is say we'll just type in Chamaecyparis. A pop-up comes up. Chamaecyparis, I don't see glauca on here. There we go, Chamaecyparis glauca. Then I have to go down and I have to hit save. I have to do that for every plant that I GPS. That's not efficient. That was one of the first things I fixed. Now, with Plant Places Mobile, if I am offline, it has a local copy of all of those plants. So when I'm in England now, I can go, when I'm off the cellular network, when I don't have data, I can go out, I can match up plants directly, save them locally to my phone. Then when I get back to the US, I choose upload, and they automatically match up to the plants on plantplaces.com. It doesn't require any more manual work for me. So that's something to keep in mind very carefully. What do we want to do when the user goes offline? What do we want to make available to the user? By the way, one note, even if you're not connected to a cellular network, you can still get GPS. Back in the 80s, President Reagan made a declaration that GPS information should be available to all users at no charge permanently because of there was an airplane shot down by the Russians because they just the airplane got off course and didn't know it. So Reagan said at that point that GPS data shall be free to everybody forever. Because of that, and this is why I can use my phone to get GPS in the UK. Because of that, no matter where you are in the world, you can get GPS data for free with your phone, which is interesting. So online, offline toggle, where do the data live? How long do we keep them in the app and when do we send them away? That's an interesting consideration. So I told you about Plant Places Mobile and I told you about Plant Places on the web. Now, I can put ads on mobile, which I do, and there are ads on the website as well. How much those ads pay is a closely guarded secret by Google. But in general, I can tell you this. A mobile ad, an ad that you click on a mobile phone, generally pays about 8 cents. It's not very much. If you click on an ad on a web page, it will pay, and again, this all depends, but rough guideline, it'll pay somewhere between 20 cents to about $1.75. So we want to turn mobile users to web users as quickly as we can. That's a consideration. That's why I say don't duplicate a website on the mobile phone. You can do something like use the mobile phone and then turn the mobile user into a web user. And if you remember the example I just showed you, I took a picture of a red placemat with the mobile app. Now that was using the onboard camera. The mobile app then digested that information, showed me the top 12 colors from that picture. I clicked on a color. It took me to a list of plants that have that color, and as soon as I clicked on a plant, it took me to the website. So I used the advantage of the onboard camera, but then as soon as I was finished with that, I converted the user to a web user. And web users will generate more money than mobile users. So that's something to be very careful about is don't keep the user in a mobile app if you can send them to a website. But then we also have to balance that with the first bullet point. Website's not going to be available offline. So what can we do online? What can we do offline versus how quickly do we want to turn the user into a web user? This is something I really fought with quite a bit. When I was making the Plant Places app, I really had to think about this for a long time. And the revenue objective of getting someone on the website helped to determine when to send someone to the web. On the same note, the idea that I could be off the cellular network entirely and a 400-acre garden in, outside of London with no data connection whatsoever, and I could still GPS plants offline because I had a local copy of those plants and I had free access to GPS satellites. That was a big consideration in online offline toggle, and I'm happy with how it turned out. So at this point, we are near the hour mark. We're at 55 minutes, and our last lecture was 45 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and cut off this lecture in just a few more moments, and we will pick up next week with mobile development steps, which should be pretty fun. That's the rest of this lecture. We'll pick up next week with that. So, what did we cover today? We talked about the syllabus, we talked about a history of mobile phones and mobile networks. And then we talked about some considerations when developing a mobile app. So don't forget, you want to do the quiz question suggestions within 24 hours. So go ahead and think about 3 questions you would put on the quiz if you were writing the quiz yourself. Okay? And um, do that. I'll send you back the quiz questions that everybody suggests, and then we'll start next week with a quiz. And right now, I'm going to go ahead and post these on YouTube and make the links available. Again, I appreciate your attention, and we'll see you next week.